Hello, everyone. How are you? Wow, you've come in promptly. That's great. Thank you. Please share, share, share. Share as much as you can, please, without Facebook getting on your necks. Steve says, hello, Doc. Hi, Steve. Lana says, hello, all. Carmen says, shared and invited. Thank you, Carmen. Lana, Steve, and two other people have joined. Carmen asks, is the sound on? I think the sound is on now, isn't it? You can't hear me, can't you? Ah, Carmen says, oh, there, oh, okay, there it is, yeah. There it is. Okay, so we're in the middle of a pandemic, and our elected representatives don't show signs, okay, of doing things to serve us. They have done a few things in the latest of the bailout bills, but there's no paid family leave yet for everybody. There's no covering, okay, of the medical costs, okay, of everyone during the crisis. There's no move to Medicare for all. The economy is in the process of totally collapsing, but there's no federal job guarantee. There's no Green New Deal. Okay, this is an emergency, and the Senate just took 3 weeks off. Okay, just decided to go home until April 20th, when we need more work done. We need more work done. In the House, the leader of the House, the Speaker of the House, has decided to work on a fourth phase, and the first idea she floats for the fourth phase are totally unacceptable from the standpoint of our interests. Okay, our interests. The whole thing is really totally ridiculous. So, during the pandemic, how do we get our elected representatives to serve the public purpose? That's the topic, okay, for tonight. And what I want to do first is to go over some articles that essentially give us details on what kind of crazy stuff is going on. Of course, we know what's in the bailout bill because I've covered that in previous streams. But I want to go through a number, okay, of other articles that deal with what's been happening since the bill was passed. Okay, since the bill was passed. So here we go. The first of these from Common Dreams by Jake Johnson, out today, March 31st. I guess I haven't quite shared that yet, have I? I will share that screen for you. I pulled up the article, I just hadn't shared it. So here we are. That should be looking pretty good at this point. Oh, well, guess what? Big surprise. No more spending, quote unquote, after securing a $4.5 trillion by bailout for corporations, Trump White House and GOP cast out on a new stimulus. They got what they wanted, right? They got what they wanted, but the Democrats that had control of the House didn't have the wit to make sure they didn't get what they wanted, okay, until after the people got what we needed. Now, of course, they had to get something because they have the Senate and they have the presidency. But they shouldn't have been allowed to get a damn thing until the public got what we needed, given what is happening now with the coronavirus health crisis and with the economic crisis caused by the virus and by our efforts to cope with the virus. The White House and Republican leaders in Congress are already throwing water on the prospect of a fourth stimulus bill that we progressives say is necessary to address the deep flaws and gaping holes in the measure President Trump signed into law last week. And what they're basically saying, what the White House economic advisor is saying to the Washington Post is, quote, "We did all the spending," unquote. And from a tweet by Crystal Ball, "Trillions for business, bare minimum for you." Jeff Stein of the Washington Post said the Democratic aides pushing the need for more dollars for Medicaid, food stamps, state aid, but they may find themselves jammed. The odds of Republicans supporting that for now, at least, are zero. No more spending. We did all the spending, quote unquote, one White House advisor says. Well, we know what the previous measure has supplied, so I'm not going to take the time to go over that. There are some problems from that particular bill. They don't cover the economic crisis people are going to go through on a continuing basis. What comes closest to that is the $600 premium that's supposed to be paid to the unemployed, an expanded cadre of the unemployed, to be sure, the $600 a week premium over what they could expect before from unemployment insurance payments. The previous bill, though, included a sneak attack on Social Security. I'm not sure about whether that's necessarily a sneak attack on Social Security. It could develop into one if we don't change the complexion of the Congress quickly, but for the long run, it shouldn't be a problem if we act the way we should act. And then, of course, there's toothless oversight of the corporate trust fund. And in fact, there's no oversight because Trump has already said he's not going to comply with any oversight. However, nevertheless, the Democratic leaders justified compromise with the Republicans on the grounds that there would be an opportunity to provide more relief for the vulnerable in a fourth stimulus bill. And Speaker Pelosi bravely said on PBS last week, "This is not going to be the last bill. This bill is about the mitigation for the economic damage that's being done. The next phase will be recovery." Sounds great, right? Only she doesn't have the political control to provide for the recovery. She gave that up when she didn't put what's needed for the recovery into the last bill, which, of course, she could have done had she wanted to be stubborn, politically stubborn. Chuck Schumer, who led the Democratic side, okay, of the negotiations on the previous stimulus measure, echoed Pelosi in a speech on the Senate floor. This is certainly not the end of our work here in Congress, rather the end of the beginning, quote unquote. More cliches for what is what is he called? Little Chucky Schmucky? Yeah, that's the nickname. Howie Klein calls him Little Chucky Schmucky. Anyway, other Republicans in the House signaled they may not be willing to accept another major spending measure, particularly one that wraps up funding for safety net programs they have tirelessly worked to cut. I'm not sure we need a fourth package, said Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader of the House, when he appeared on Fox News on Sunday. Quote, and before we go to start drafting a fourth package, I like these three packages we just put out to take care and get this economy moving, unquote. And Pat Toomey said, it's far too soon, know whether and of what nature additional legislation is needed. After all, we got ours. Toomey said, the ink is hardly dry on a $2 million plus emergency package. If we determine another one is necessary, it should not be the vehicle for Speaker Pelosi's partisan parochial wish list. Of course, we knew that was coming. Why can't we have the wish list? Why not? Well, I'll bet after passing this stimulus package with no pay-fors, the Republicans are going to say to Nancy Pelosi, how are you going to pay for it, Nancy? How are you going to pay for it, Nancy? Some analysts suggested that Republican reluctance to spend on public relief may not persist if, as expected, future reports continue the trend of enormous increases in unemployment and declines in economic growth. Okay, in other words, if this week's unemployment insurance applications are comparable to last week's, then the Republican position might soften a little. And then if the week following is again of comparable size and the week following that is of comparable size, so by the time the Republicans get back to Washington and the Democrats in the Senate, we have 20 million new unemployed people and a total of 25 million people. Yes, maybe their reluctance to spend on relief for the public will soften somewhat. Maybe. It doesn't matter what some random West Wing jerk is posturing, tweeted Tyson Brody, research director for Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign, referring to the advisor's comments to the Post. The coming revenue collapse will either change tunes now or in November. In November. He's looking forward to November. But what good will November be if in November we get either Donald Trump or Joe Biden? What's Joe Biden going to do? What is he for? We haven't heard much from him about what he's for, have we? We don't know whether to expect anything different from him if comes election time in November we have 25 million unemployed or 30 million unemployed or God knows how many unemployed. Bernie says we must make sure the checks from the first stimulus package get to people as quickly as possible. Next, we must build a new stimulus package to go even further, said Bernie in the roundtable he held the other night, or was it in a separate statement? I forget. I just watched the roundtable. I think he said something like that in there as well. So let's go further. We have Nancy Pelosi. has offered a bright idea, written up by Owen Higgins of Common Dreams, who says Pelosi's terrible idea, quote unquote, critics denounce proposal to give wealthy a tax cut in the next stimulus package. Can you believe that? A trickle-down tax cut from Nancy Pelosi, reportedly set to propose rolling back a cap on tax deductions, which would benefit earning Americans as part of the next step of an economic stimulus package that has already poured trillions into the U.S. economy, much of it going to the richest individuals and corporations in the country. The California Democrats plan to retroactively undo the state and local tax deduction limits would be a major tax break for households earning over $100,000, according to critics like the University of Michigan's Professor Justin Wolfers. And Justin tweeted, Pelosi's terrible idea, retroactively raising the cap on state and local tax deductions. Yeah, retroactive tax deductions are always a bad idea. They're a giveaway that gets you nothing. This one goes almost entirely to households who are earning at least $100,000 per year. And there's an article in the Times about what Justin Wolfers had to say, because Justin Wolfers gets some exposure in the Times from time to time. There's skepticism about the proposal, of course. Seth Hanlon, a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, was also a reason not to lift the limit in the next economic the rescue bill. That is particularly true because consumption data show that low and middle income Americans are more likely than higher earners to spend the benefits from the government immediately and stimulate economic activity. So even the Center for American Progress, even they are opposed to this silly tax cut proposal from this silly senior citizen who no longer belongs in the Congress, and much less belongs as the leader of the Democratic Party in the Congress. She is why things always turn out so badly from the Democratic side, or at least a good part of the reason why. And Morris Pearl of the Patriotic Millionaires, the chair of that organization, dismissed Nancy Pelosi's plan as a huge mistake. The last people need help right now are the well-off taxpayers who would be affected by this change, said Morris Pearl. Congress should instead be prioritizing low-income and middle-class workers most directly hurt by the economic effects of the coronavirus. And Pearl went on to say if Democrats want to be the party of working people, prioritizing tax cuts for wealthy taxpayers, even in blue states, is not the right thing to do. We already have too many politicians in Washington who answers every problem is to cut taxes for the rich. Is that amazingly ridiculous? Wasn't that amazingly ridiculous? Boy, when I read that, I just like, ah! Okay, next we have a piece again from Common Dreams, this time from Jake Johnson, also today. With bills due on April 1st, more than 400,000 demand Congress freeze all rent, mortgage, and utility payments. More than 400 people have signed a petition calling on Congress to freeze all rent, all mortgage, and all utility payments nationwide in order to prevent a looming housing catastrophe as millions of Americans head into April jobless and unsure whether they will be able to afford their bills. And of course, there are a number of quotes about this as well, but the news is that 400,000 Americans have already signed a petition. Will there be 600,000 more at the end of this week? An estimated 43 million U.S. households are renters, according to the National Multifamily Housing Council. Wednesday marks the first time rent payments are due since the corona crisis shuttered large segments of the economy and sparked mass layoffs. Nearly 3.3 million people filed unemployment claims 2 weeks ago, and millions more likely lost their jobs last weekend. We are waiting to hear what that particular figure is. Quote, asked consumer public advocacy group Public Citizen, quote, how the hell are people expected to pay their bills tomorrow? Rent, mortgage, utilities, and more must be frozen immediately, unquote. And Sia Weaver, a spokesperson for the New York-based tenant coalition Housing Justice for All, warned that the U.S. could see, quote, apocalyptic levels of homelessness and evictions if lawmakers don't freeze rent and other monthly payments immediately. And Housing Justice for All tweeted, if we had a homes guarantee, hashtag homes guarantee, millions of people wouldn't be worried about paying rent tomorrow or on May 1st or on June 1st. Imagine that. Imagine it. Indeed, they'd be able to stay home and worry about protecting themselves from the coronavirus pandemic, which is what we want them to do right now. But of course, as was said by The Intercept's Aida Chavez on Friday, quote, major bill payments have barely factored into U.S. politicians' response to the coronavirus pandemic. And note that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on Tuesday criticized the New York Governor Andrew Cuomo for demanding a 90-day moratorium on mortgage payments while ignoring renters. Quote, if you called for suspension or moratorium on mortgage payments, then we would also call for that same treatment on rent payments, unquote. Ocasio-Cortez said during an appearance on the Brian Lira show on WNYC. Quote, we're essentially rewarding and offering preferential treatment to landowners and folks who are more wealthy, and we're not offering the same kind of relief to renters, unquote. Of course, she's entirely right. That is what is going on. That is what is going on. It's top down. It's top down in New York State. And of course, so many people are enamored of Andrew Cuomo now because he seems to be a strong voice in handling the health aspects of the crisis. By the way, part of which in New York State are due to him cutting down, participating in the cutting down of hospital beds over so many years, okay, in New York State. But and also doing other things to impose austerity on the state, which has hurt renters in New York State. He's always been a top-down politician. He's never been a champion of the people. He's not a champion of the people here. Anyway, next is an article from the American Prospect today. And I'll share the screen for that one as well. And that article is by Dave Dayen, also March 31st. This is Unsanitized Stimulus, Episode 4, A New Hope. And Dave had a number of choice things to say. With President Trump extending his guidelines for social distancing to the end of April, and the expectation that will need to be extended again given the unchecked nature of the virus in much of the country, talk has turned to another economic survival and rescue package on top of the two smaller relief bills and the $2.2 trillion monster passed last week. Well, at least talk has turned within one caucus, says Dave. That would be the House Democrats, who now want to bargain over all the things Republicans rejected in the first three bills. On a conference call yesterday, Speaker Nancy Pelosi said her caucus was taking inventory on what the public needed, throwing out ideas like a surge of funds for hospitals for personal protective equipment and coronavirus testing. I can't imagine that the Democrats didn't force funding for that into the earlier bills. How irresponsible was it not to force funding into those bills? Everybody needed that kind of funding literally to live. And these people wouldn't take on the Republicans over that. And medical leave, fully paid medical leave. No, they didn't take the Republicans on about that in the earlier bills. More state and local government aid, they didn't take them on about that. They took them on over some aid, but not all the aid the states needed. Also assistance for overburdened pension funds. Didn't do anything about that. Guaranteed free treatment of COVID-19 cases for everyone. Didn't do anything about that. An OSHA emergency temporary standard to mandate safety rules in workplaces kept open through the crisis, like Amazon. Didn't do anything about that. And longer-term goals like a build-out of broadband to secure access to telehealth for people. And, of course, they did nothing to push the idea of Medicare for all when we really, really, really need it above all in this particular crisis. Pelosi has also talked about more direct payments to individuals and even lifting the state and local tax deduction cap from the Trump tax cuts, something that specifically targets high-income earners in blue states as a stimulus measure. The spokesman for Pelosi said this would be, quote, targeted, unquote, to the middle class, which is impossible unless there's a giant section of the middle class that itemizes deductions, and there isn't. You'll notice, says David, that all these ideas are coming from one side of the aisle. Republicans, you see, already secured their bailout for the powerful and had no interest in what they're sure to call a partisan wish list. Whoa! You saw that other article today in which they called it a partisan wish list, right? And Dave quotes Jeffrey Stein as well, quote, no more spending, we did all the spending. Quotes Jeffrey Stein quoting Republicans. It's amazing that Democrats had to relearn this lesson, says Dave. They gave up all their leverage in Stimulus 3. Maybe economic conditions will wither to the point that Stimulus 4 will become necessary, but that's going to be well in the future for Republicans as long as their business base is satiated. The whole point of doing the bailout and individual relief together was to maximize both. If you left a bunch of individual relief on the table, you did it wrong. Guess what, Nancy Pelosi? You did it wrong. Guess what, Chuck Schumer? You did it wrong. One Republican leader, House Energy and Commerce Ranking Member Greg Walton, did make noise about a next virus response bill, but only to tout his pet surprise billing legislation, which was headed towards this timeline anyway. I don't know what that particular legislation is. I'm not going to click on the link to find out. A series of temporary health-related tax extensions expire in May, which was intended to push lawmakers to deal with surprise billing and maybe drug prices. That was the plan at the end of last year. Well, this is what it's about, which I don't really remember existing. Surely insurance companies and doctor groups will still want to fight it out over who can overcharge the public. But I wouldn't call that a, quote, virus response, unquote, bill necessarily. But it would be good to get rid of surprise billing. That would be a good thing if it ever happened, which it would, of course, under Medicare for All. Meanwhile, big business is more concerned with bending the rules on the third stimulus than looking to a fourth. But lobbyists are trying to overrule a provision that limits companies with junk bond debt ratings from getting Federal Reserve loans. The Fed is already engaging in transactions beyond the bailout bill to assist real estate developers and ease up on bank the regulations for banks. Airlines had to agree to conditions not to lay off workers until September 30th. Oh, great. But they can lay off workers after that. After that. Does the bailout somehow stop on September 30th? So then they can lay off the workers? And a couple big ones made immediate layoff plans for October 1st. They're now negotiating over what equity to give the government. I think the government should take all the equity and then give them back some if they never lay off any of the workers. In other words, the bailouts are progressing in the realm where business is most comfortable, outside of Congress. They have no need to go back inside, so workers can get paid sick leave without the leverage. Dave says, I'd say Stimulus 4 is a long way off, though that doesn't stop Nancy Pelosi from playing kabuki. Kabuki. How do we stop it from being kabuki? I'll take that up in just a little while. As of this morning, by the way, the New York Times shows 163,575 U.S. cases of the coronavirus. That compares with 141,995 yesterday. So that's 21,000 more overnight. And 3,073 deaths versus 2,486 yesterday. So that's 587 more deaths overnight. Gee. In 4 nights, we'll start getting to the scale of 9/11 deaths, won't we? Well, actually, we will have surpassed, the 9/11 deaths. But we will add in that time as many deaths as we had on 9/11. So it took 2 to 3 days to get from 2,000 to 3,000 dead, the same time it took to get from 1,000 to 2,000. Johns Hopkins shows a similar count, and the COVID-19 tracker also shows a similar count. There's better news on testing. 956,481 tests have now been completed. That's versus 851,578 just yesterday. So testing grew by about 105,000 tests since yesterday. But testing growth, the growth in the number of people tested, has stalled out, and that's probably affecting the increase in cases. In other words, there are a lot more cases out there. And there seem to be as little as 163,575 only because the growth in testing has stalled out. What are we to estimate or to assume? If you watch John Campbell, he'd probably say there's probably a 10-to-1 ratio of actual cases to tested cases, because the tested cases are still, the tests are such a small percentage of the population. So he'd probably say that we have more like 1.6 million cases out there now than 164,000. But we will know after we pass the peak and things seem to slow down, settle down, we'll be able to track back and see how many cases there really were at the end of March. Probably, though, we won't see the peak until sometime way into to April. Another useful metric is hospitalizations, which have been spiking in places like California. This tracker estimates peak usage of hospital beds, seen as April 15th, compared to those that are available. This is in both the regular and the ICU categories. It also includes ventilators needed. Right now there's a shortage on peak usage day, supposed to be April 15th, of 54,046 beds. Shortage of 54,000 nationwide. 13,856 ICU beds and 26,381 ventilators. And of course, April 15th is just 2 weeks away. Now, there have been reports that more testing is starting up soon, and quick testing. Abbott Labs has announced it has gotten FDA approval for its 5-minute testing procedure, and that's supposed to start shipping this week. And I believe they think they can do something like 50,000 a day of those tests, which would certainly help things, because it will amount to 350,000 more tests per week. Okay, that's going to help things. There's also another company, a smaller company, that has a 15-minute test, and they're going to start to ship as well, and also license their tests to others who will also start to ship. So it looks like testing is going to be speeding up, and if testing speeds up, then you can be sure the case count is going to start to speed up too. And the media's latest white knight, who is that? Of course, it's Andrew Cuomo. A recent poll shows that New Yorkers have rallied around Cuomo with 87% support. And he says, maybe it's because of my allergy to cable news and relatively little exposure to Cuomo's media blitz. But aside from yelling at the president to get him more stuff, which he's right to do given the tragedy unfolding in New York City, I can't say that he's doing such a great job. As recently as March the 6th, Cuomo was reassuring New Yorkers irresponsibly that we have far more people in the hospital from the flu than from COVID-19. His slow walk on emptying jails at risk of an outbreak has led to a predictable health catastrophe at Rikers Island, with over 300 inmates and staff already infected. Upstate prisoners are making hand sanitizer for 65 cents an hour. However, so maybe they can pilfer some of that and hope for the best. Cuomo's also using the crisis as cover to reverse last year's historic bail reform, which would add to the prison population during a crisis. Wonderful governor, isn't he? Okay, in the middle of a public health emergency, Cuomo was determined to make a crippling $2.5 billion in Medicaid cuts, including $400 million in trims to hospitals, based on a recommendation made months earlier and not revised after the crisis. Cutting Medicaid would leave New York on the outside of $6.7 billion in federal aid. But Cuomo has responded to that, not by standing down, but by saying, quote, "We can't do a budget without changes to Medicaid," unquote. For the details, check out Akash Mehta's report. So the state budget is due today, and Medicaid and education will take their lumps, part of drastic spending cuts, while billions in potential taxes on the wealthy are left untapped. Meanwhile, Wall Street veterans have been put in charge of the recovery in New York State, appointments that intersect with Cuomo's tax policy. He recently gave tax breaks to yachts and private planes. The poor and the vulnerable will be whacked with austerity at the worst possible time, and insisting on cuts to hospitals right now borders on the insane, but it certainly fits with Cuomo's record of shielding the rich from any sacrifice. So that's what Dave Dayen has to say. Of course, he's very sarcastic about the possibility of the Democrats anointing Cuomo as the latest line of saviors from Donald Trump. There's more, but I'm not going to go through the rest of this. There'll be another one tomorrow, but this was certainly a very good piece by Dave Dayen. It certainly gives you an impression of what's happening on the coronavirus front and also what's really happening in New York State, and also the craziness going on in Congress at this time. So there's one more that I want to call your attention to, and then I'll get to the reason why you're here, which is probably to find out what to do. So I picked this up at reader-supported news. It's by Norman Solomon, who's a high-ranking member of the Bernie Sanders campaign and very much for Bernie. And Norman says, and also he's one of the founders of Roots Action, and a very progressive person, very progressive, actual progressive. In the last few weeks, New York and Pennsylvania postponed voting in presidential primaries from April until June. A dozen other states have also rescheduled. So basically, the so-called Excella primary has been rescheduled for June. Those wise decisions are in sharp contrast to a failure of leadership from Joe Biden, and the DNC. Remember, but Perez issued a statement that the Hill newspaper summed up with the headline, "DNC calls on states not to postpone the primaries." And Tom Perez put out the statement on the day that 3 states were holding their primary elections. Ohio was also supposed to have his with Perez, and Perez criticized the governor for putting forth a delay at the 11th hour, saying it only breeds more chaos and confusion. No such thing happened in the state of Illinois, though. Governor J.B. Pritzker, a billionaire, whose billionaire sister, Penny Pritzker, was Barack Obama's 2008 National Campaign Finance Chair and later became his Secretary of Commerce, refused to reschedule the March 17th primary. Just 3 days later, he announced a stay-at-home order for the whole state. So imagine this. It's 3 days. In 3 days, it suddenly turned into an emergency. But it wasn't an emergency on voting day. It only turned into an emergency justifying a stay-at-home order until 3 days later. Think about it. On Tuesday, the governor enables an Illinois election that draws about 1 million voters and thousands of election workers to voting sites that day. On Friday, the same governor orders everyone in the state to stay home. Perez, who became the DNC chair 3 years ago, as the party's Clintonite so-called moderate wing, is clearly aligned with Biden. Postponing primary races in states where Biden was way ahead in opinion polls, as in Illinois, would risk slowing Biden's momentum against Bernie Sanders. So, of course, we couldn't have that, right? So, public health be damned. Symone Sanders, who now is working for Biden, of course, during an interview on March 15th on CNN, said, quote, I encourage people to get out there and vote on Tuesday. And the spin included upbeat, patriotism time types of rationales like, quote, in times of war, in times of strife, our country has always upheld our need to uphold our democracy. We have voted in wartime. Votes were held many times in this country after times of strife, unquote. What that has to do with the virus, I'm afraid I don't understand. Because the virus ain't about strife. It's about getting sick when you're too close to other people. In their zeal to boost the number of Biden delegates as fast as possible, the Biden campaign and the DNC chair ignored or distorted the guidelines that were in effect at the time from the Centers for Disease Control, CDC. Deeply disappointed that the DNC is willfully choosing not to listen to scientists. The party of science is not listening to scientists. During one of the most critical moments in recent history, tweeted the biologist Dr. Lucky Tran on March 17th when voters in 3 states were casting their ballots. By then, as CBS News noted, even the White House had something to say about that. They had issued new guidelines designed to slow the rapid spread of the coronavirus, asking every American to stay home from work or school. Of course, very many of the polling places were at schools. So the Americans who went out to vote shouldn't have been going to school. So Katie Halper had a great article on this, which appeared in FAIR. And there's a link to this in the article from Reader-Supported News. Yeah, I've left a link to Reader-Supported News and all the other things I've covered tonight as well. So the postponement of the primaries may give enough time to implement widespread voting by mail. Of course, Trump doesn't want to see that, so there may be opposition to that. And of course, Trump bears the overwhelming responsibility for the deadly governmental negligence as the COVID-19 pandemic has spread in the United States. But that reality in no way made it okay for the Biden campaign and the DNC to forcefully advocate for maintaining a primary schedule that was certain to expose people to the virus. And look at what's happened. Specifically, there are 3 election workers in Florida who have come down with the virus, and they came down with it within 6 days of their work on the polls, which is roughly the incubation period for the virus. Now, this happened in Florida. I don't know whether any similar things happened, in Illinois. We have to wait and see. They may be covering it up. It may be that similar things did happen there. But we have to wait and see. Meanwhile, along with raising millions of dollars for caregiving charities, the Sanders campaign has been energetic and creative online, with efforts such as championing health protection for Amazon workers, which, by the way, has been extended to Walmart workers as well, calling for comprehensive health care coverage for everyone in the country during the pandemic, fighting huge rip-offs by corporations of the public, and providing strong populist messages during the TV interviews he's had. The anemic response to the emergency from Biden and his allies is another ominous sign that he is not equipped to rid the country of the vile Trump presidency. Another straw in the wind is a new Washington Post ABC News national poll that shows an enormous voter motivation gap. That's the one that shows only 24% of Biden's supporters are enthusiastic about his candidacy, which is the lowest total in years for a major party candidate. So the political strategy of relying on emphasizing how bad Trump is without offering any progressive leadership was a catastrophic failure 4 years ago. Providing feeble alternatives while trying to reminisce about real or imagined glory days of the Obama administration is apt to prove woefully inadequate in 2020, something that I entirely agree with. But the main point of this is that this is another example of our elites doing things in their interest, but not, in our interest. So this is not just about the Congress doing things, it's also about our parties, in this case, the Democratic Party, actually deliberately endangering us in order to fulfill what they consider to be their perceived interests, which, of course, was and is perceived by them to be to defeat Bernie Sanders. So what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this? I hate to advocate the following blunt instrument as the way to get rid of this kind of behavior, because it is a rather desperate thing to do, but we are in a desperate situation right now. Consider, we cannot canvass, we cannot protest in public, we cannot congregate, we are not free to assemble, we are not free to go out there and give speeches, we are not free to have rallies. At this point, these things cannot be done. Everything we can do has to be online, by telephone, by mail. That's what we can do until the crisis, is over. So, I know that we don't consider it to be very effective to flood Congress with our messages. We are not enthusiastic about calling up a congressperson and calling up our 2 senators each day and sending emails to them or writing letters to them. But this is what we can do at this point. I think the question is the kind of letters we send to them. I think these letters have to be threatening in the sense that they threaten our congresspeople with dismissal if they don't vote for what we perceive to be the public purpose. We have to do this especially with leadership. Nancy Pelosi right now is getting primaried for the first time. People in her district have to sit on her, have to call her, have to email her, have to do everything they can using electronic means and using the mail in order to deliver messages that are forthright, telling her the fourth stimulus bill has to contain nothing but help for people, nothing but funds to pay for their medical bills during this time, to support them during this time, to help them to keep their consumption at an acceptable sort of level, and to save them from any rent crises or mortgage crises or utilities crises. Or from healthcare debt that they might have during this period of time. During this period of time. We have to be badgering them every single day. I'm not kidding. Every single day. All of us have to badger our representatives. We have to say things. I noticed that Nancy Pelosi is floating this particular proposal right now to have tax cuts for people making over $100,000. And we have to say, we are unalterably opposed to such tax cuts. Of course, we have to speak for us as individuals. We're unalterably opposed to such a tax cut. If you line up behind her on this, we are going to vote for whoever is challenging you. That is to say, if you have a primary challenger, we're going to vote for the primary challenger. If you have a challenger in the general election, we're going to vote you out. You will vote for our interests or you will not stay in Congress. You will not stay in Congress. We have to threaten them with punishment. We have to do that. That is the only thing they're going to understand. If we don't threaten them with that dull instrument and very unsophisticated instrument, they're going to play their usual games, their subtle games, their games in Congress that require very, very close observation to see what the games are. They're going to make it seem like, oh, well, they're all right. They're not really against us. They're really for us. They're going to play kabuki again and again and again, constantly. The only way we can judge them is by the results. If they vote for a Pelosi bill that is not adequate, that doesn't defend our interests, but that bails out high-income people further, we then have to vote against them. We have to get them out. Now, that has to be done by Democrats to Democrats. And that has to be done by Republicans to Republicans. The Republicans have to throw their incumbents out. And the independents have to throw whichever incumbent they have out of whatever party, if that incumbent is selling their interests out. Everybody has to do this blunt thing, because the only way those people will learn that they have to vote in our interest is to teach them that if they do not, they are gone. However painful it is for us, we can't give them a chance to say, I am the lesser of two evils. Because they'll play that game all day long and all night long and all campaign long with us. They'll debate about why they're the lesser of two evils. Look, Joe Biden versus Donald Trump right now. And what's going on? I mean, the Democrats are basically saying, well, you got to vote for Biden because he's the one most able to beat Trump. And of course, he may not be offering you anything, but he's the lesser of two evils. Well, there are people, Nico House, for example, who will argue that Biden is not the lesser of two evils, that he's the greater of two evils. I don't really want to debate. I don't really want to get into that kind of a debate. We have to vote against Trump. He's an incumbent. We have to vote against him. But that doesn't mean we have to vote for Biden. We can see that Biden has no intention of fulfilling our interests. So for God's sake, vote for a third-party candidate. Punish Biden too. What's Biden doing in the middle of the coronavirus crisis? He's not pushing for a Medicare for All bill? What is that about? In the middle of a total economic collapse, he's not pushing for a federal job guarantee bill? What is that about? He's pushing for hardly anything. He's just not pushing. He's just fooling around. He's just, when he does these interviews, he looks like he's in his cups. He looks like he doesn't know what to say. He looks like he's incompetent and that he's incapable. But apart from that, he never offers to legislate anything, to support any legislation that is really in our interests. We can't have him as the president for 4 years. Of course, he said, well, maybe I'll only be there for 2 years. So then who's going to be the president? Kamala Harris? What is she going to offer to us? More prosecutions of black people? I mean, what is going on there? The centrist Democrats are offering nothing to the people. They're doing nothing to the people. Their incumbents, the rule in the primaries, has to be get rid of the centrist. Get rid of the centrist. In the general, it has to be don't vote for the centrist because they're not going to do anything for you. They've already shown us what they're not going to do for us. No paid leave, no coverage of medical expenses, no real sustainable income during this period of time, no federal job guarantee, no Medicare for all, no Green New Deal stuff, nothing, nothing, a pittance, crumbs that our progressives in Congress had to fight hard for, so that they think they accomplished great things by getting those crumbs for us. Our people have to learn how to dig their heels in and say, we're not compromising. You want to pass this bill? You need us. And we're not coming until you satisfy the interests of our constituents, until you satisfy the public purpose. That is what we have to do. When we get into these fights, when our Congress people get into these fights, they have to fight to solve the problems. Half measures don't help. They really don't. The pressure has to be built up so great that the incumbents know if they don't do what the public wants, they're surely going to be out. If they think they can blame the progressives, fine. But they're not going to get away with that in the fall. They're the ones who have control. They're the ones who have control. They're the ones who have the power to pass the bills. If they don't get results, it's on them. It's on them. The only way we can put it on them is to vote that way in the primaries. We have to say to people, we're judging you on results. We voted for you in 2018. You take someone like Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, okay, and Elaine Luria in Virginia, and Jennifer Wexton in my district, okay, in Virginia. Now, they're all fine ladies. They're nowhere near as bad as the Republicans in their district. But they haven't gotten results for us. They haven't gotten results. That's the fact of the matter. They didn't go to Pelosi and pressure her and say, this doesn't get results for my constituents. I'm not going along with it. I don't care what you say. That's the kind of stuff we need from our people. Teresa says there is more than voting. In the middle of the corona crisis, there's no going outside. There's no going outside for months. There are no protests outside. There are no rallies outside. There's no canvassing. That's the truth. There's no canvassing. The tools we have right now are letters, they're telephone calls, there are live streams, there's social media stuff. Those are the things we can do to influence them. We have to influence them with the tools we have and with the content that we can place in order to influence. The only language they understand is that their electoral heads are going to be cut off if they don't solve the real problems that we're going to be facing. We, the people, are facing a collapsed economy. We got to have the job guarantee right now. We got to have Medicare for all right now. We got to have the Green New Deal right now. We have to scare them with numbers. Yes, Barbara Wernig is spot on. If we develop a movement that brings them those letters in unprecedented numbers and phone calls every day that completely tie up the lines in the Congress, in the House, okay, and in the Senate. If we primary their asses, and it's not primary their asses, let's take Josh Collins in the Washington 10th, okay? He's primarying Denny Heck. People have got to be calling Denny Heck and telling him, look, if you keep siding with Pelosi and you don't do what we need and develop legislation that's going to solve our problems, we're going for Josh Collins. Because we know if we get him in, then next year at least he's going to do that. We've got to get the ones in primaries. In California, we got to do Shahid Buttar. And we got to pressure Pelosi all along the way. And we got to tell her, if you don't shape up, we're all going to vote for Shahid, and you're out. You're out. You're gone. You're finished. It's going to be bye-bye Nancy. We're going to sing that song like they sang to Marjorie Mezvinsky in 1994. After she voted for NAFTA or something, something like that in Pennsylvania. So, yeah, we have to be militant, and we can't be polite with our Congress people. This is not about being polite anymore. Our Congress people and our senators work for us. They think they work for the donors. But if they think we're going to defeat them, they're going to be working for us. That's what we got to get them to do. We got to treat them like we're their bosses. We got to talk to them that way. We got to order them around. That is what we need to do. No being polite. No giving them credit for good things they've done. Because they haven't done good things. They haven't gotten us results. The feeble effort to get us something in a $2.2 trillion bill wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough. That's it. We got to make them do things that are good enough. If not, we go bankrupt. If not, we die. If not, the economy entirely goes south. If not, the coronavirus is going to be a total disaster. But Trump is now saying, well, if we hold this to 100,000 dead, that's going to be really amazing. That's going to be a real good performance. And Deborah Birx today said, in order to hold this to between 100 and 200,000 dead Americans, we would have to do everything nearly perfectly from here on in. That's not good enough. If that's the case, Trump needs to resign right now and not go further, because it means he acted incompetently to get us to this point where we can lose between 100 and 200,000. That's the fact. Sometimes you have to not just look forward, but look backward and make people accountable. Make them accountable now. Develop such pressure on the Congress that they finally impeach his butt. That's really what we need right now. We've got to hold him accountable right now. No, there were 400,000 dead in World War II, Steve. But 100 to 200,000 is half the number of dead we had in World War II. But you have to look at this as a percentage of the country, of course. We're no longer 150 million people, we're now 330 million people. But, okay, I'm sorry. I'm not yelling at you, Kay. I'm not yelling at you. I'm just yelling because I gotta yell. I'm sorry. The point is that we might not suffer only from 100,000 to 200,000 dead. If we still do too little, because this administration is fooling around, cutting corners, trying to do things for cronies, not trying to do things for us, we could lose 1% of the population. We could lose 1% of the population. That's 3.3 million Americans. Will the country recover from that kind of failure? It will be a collective failure if we allow this. Sure, it will be primarily due to Trump and his incompetent administration. It will be primarily due to the neoliberals. It will be primarily due to their evil. But it will also be due to our failure to bother these people every single day with huge numbers, to let them know we're watching, we're evaluating, and they are not going to be returned. They're not going to be returned if they don't do what's in our interest. We have to make sure that every last one of them, especially people like Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Kirsten Gillibrand, Sherrod Brown, we have to make sure they all know that in the end, the bottom line is they do work for us. They really do. They really don't work for the donors. And we have to persuade them, once again, that that is true. And we have to persuade them that if they don't do what is in our interests, nothing will protect them from the pitchforks. Either the electoral pitchforks or eventually other pitchforks as well. The pitchforks are coming. And Joe Biden, unlike Barack Obama, 400,000 of our dead in World War II. There were millions dead in World War II. Okay. Anyway, That's what we have to convince them about. We have to convince them about that we have the pitchforks and that they can't afford to ignore those any longer. Okay, I've spoken my piece for today. Now I'm going to move to your comments. Thank you for sitting through my thank you for sitting through my angry exposition. I am not usually so angry, but I couldn't help it tonight. Okay. Please also share again. Okay, I need to have some shares. Okay. Okay, and I also need to remind you that the Patreon account is at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. And please, please, please do what you can there. I know everybody is asking you to do what you can. But, we're all in the same boat. We have to ask everybody else to do what they can. And Teresa Sanders says, hola, compatriots. And I can go back to the beginning in StreamYard. It's actually easier to see. And Lana says, the problem with the freeze is after the 3 months are over, you're expected to still cough up the dollars on the first day of the fourth month. Only helpful in a very limited time frame. It's true. However, if by the fourth month Congress has passed an appropriate bailout, then the people will have the money to cough up in the fourth month. So the moratorium is a help for April and May and June. But during April, May, and June, the Congress will have the time to vote what they already should have voted for, mainly a bill such as the Rashida Tlaib bill, something like that. And Lana says, frozen and forgiven, not just frozen. Frozen and forgiven is good. Frozen and forgiven, okay, is good. And everybody says hi, Dolores, and Dolores says hi. Sandy says Cuomo is an ass. Carmen says kicking renters in the streets would truly be genocide of untold scale. It would be, especially now. Sandy says, hi, Susan. And Sandy says, but they have what they need. Screw the people. Exactly, Sandy. That's the attitude they're taking. We have what we need. Screw the people now. We got what we need. I got some apples for them. Maybe what the Democrats should do is propose a bill to take back the $454 billion, to repeal the $454 billion portion of the earlier bill, of the bailout bill. Let the Republicans shoot it down. Let them fail to vote for it. Nancy Pelosi needs to have the stones to pass that bill in the House and send it on to the Senate. and then let Mitch kill it in the Senate. What will that do? It may give ammunition to the Democrats running in Kentucky that they can use to beat Mitch. Maybe that will be the thread that will put Democrats over the line there and get Mitch out. Matt Stoller said that Liz and Bernie could have put a hold on the deal, hold on the bill to get a better deal. I think Matt Stoller is right. I think he's absolutely right about that. I think that Bernie is scared in situations like this. I know that because in 2010 he could have put a hold on the Affordable Care Act. He used it to hold up things on the Affordable Care Act. And what did he negotiate for? He negotiated for $10 billion over 10 years for the community health centers. Why didn't he negotiate for $100 billion over 10 years for the community health centers? That would have done a tremendous amount by way of providing a public option at that time. Bernie didn't have the stones to do that. He played small ball with the $10 billion over 10 years. Bernie just doesn't bargain that well or that hard. Yes, he's for great things. But when he gets into a fight in Congress, he doesn't drive them to the edge. He's not the kind of person who simply walks away. If his constituencies get something that's good out of a bill, he's going to vote for that bill. Like take the crime bill. Why did he vote for the crime bill? Because the Violence Against Women Act was part of the crime bill. He couldn't bring himself to vote against that. So he voted for the crime bill because that was in the crime bill. Well, that was a very good thing that was in the crime bill. But why did it have to be a part of the crime bill? It was obviously the leadership's tactic to get people who are really progressive to vote for the crime bill. I think the progressives should have had the guts to say, I'm not voting for that dog. I'm not voting to put all of these people of color into jail so I can get this other very good act through. I'm going to decouple these two acts. And I'll fight against one and I'll fight for the other. That's what they should have done. That's what Bernie should have done back then. But Bernie never does that. Kay says, I don't know about Liz, but Bernie wanted some help to get to people ASAP. But it hasn't gotten to the people ASAP. The first of that money is going to get to people in 3 weeks. Except for those who are already on unemployment insurance. They will get some help fairly quickly. I think probably more quickly than 3 weeks. But most of the people covered by the bill won't be helped at all for 3 weeks. And some of them won't be helped for months. For months. So he didn't get the money to people ASAP. If he wanted to get that, he should have put in an amendment that specified what was in the Rashida Tlaib bill, specifically distributing these debit cards to people that were loaded with substantial funds that they could have used to pay their rent or to get the cash from banks necessary to pay their rent. Those could have been gotten to people inside of a week. Evelina says, then why didn't they? I wonder. Maybe they were talking to the wrong advisors. They're doing, a lot of different things, especially Bernie, who's still running for president. He's trying to talk to the big issues. He doesn't get into the details of these bills. And maybe the people who are working for him, who get into the details of the bills, weren't clear on the kind of measure that was being passed by Rashida. That was going on in the House. Well, that was, I should say, being passed, but getting introduced into the Congress by Rashida. Okay, says Bernie was working for another bill to address other things, but for the longer term. Steve says, I'm sorry, but 1,200 ain't going to go far here in Los Angeles. But Steve, you're a single person, and yes, doesn't go very far, okay, in Los Angeles, okay, for a single person. But for a married couple with 2 children, it's $3,400. That goes further. That goes further. Kay says, won't go very far anywhere else either, Steve. Although worse there for sure. I have to admit, I don't know how far 3,400 will go for a family of 4 in Los Angeles either. Sandy says it won't work for New York or New Jersey. We have a high standard of living here as well. Yes, I know. It doesn't go very far here in the D.C. area also. And Evelina says, Pelosi playing kabuki, laugh out loud. Yeah, she's been playing kabuki for ages. She knows how to play it very well. Or San Francisco, right? That's true. Or San Francisco. And Sandy says they're supposed to be making DIY tests coming out, but who knows when. I think the Abbott Laboratories test, okay, I think that can be, okay, a DIY test. Okay, but of course, it won't take 5 minutes then, okay, in order to get to the results of that test. You'll have to send the swab in. Okay. Okay, if you go to a testing center, a drive-through testing center, and you sit in a car, and they give you the swab, and you take a back of the throat type of swab, and then you return it to them, and they have one of the testing kits there in the drive-through, then they would be able to tell you within 5 minutes whether you're positive or not. Someone commented on Tom Hartman's feed today that those of us with a brain should find a corner of the country to live in and secede. I agree. Well, secession, of course, is not going to do any good because the army, Carmen says all those deaths and many more coming will it deplete labor as a resource. It all depends on how many die. If it's 1%, it will have a material effect on the labor force. Of course, the labor force is very large, so it's like 170 million people. So if 1.5 million people out of the labor force are gone, it's going to have some impact, but there's still going to be a lot left. Kay says, I'm stuck in Canton, Ohio. Hated it here before I moved to southeastern North Carolina in 1995 for over 20 years. It's way worse now. All this pitiful town has left is the football. HOF, SMH. Lana says, Abbott Labs in New Jersey. It says so many pharmaceutical companies in New Jersey, thus Cory Booker, okay, originally against reducing drug prices. Sandy says, I think they test your antibodies to see if you have it or had it. Not the Abbott Laboratories test, the other company's test. I forget what the other company is called. There's a smaller company that's coming out with a test, and they test your antibodies. Okay, that's a 15-minute test. Okay, they can tell you whether you've had it. They cannot tell you whether you still have it, however. Sandy says, hi, Barbara. Barbara says, hi, Sandy. And Steve says, Doc, do you think our society will ever go back to what it was before this crisis? But I suppose nothing ever goes completely back. I don't know. It depends upon how much damage is done in the crisis. If the administration is able to contain, okay, the number of deaths to 100,000, I don't know. It may be that people will tend to forget. People have a fantastic capacity to forget. Like, it all depends on the time. But, for example, after the Second World War, the memory of the New Deal and the war effort was pretty strong in people. It persisted through the 1950s and through the 60s and into the early 70s. But by then, there was a new generation around who had never experienced those things, or who weren't able to remember that those things were done and what it felt like. And so they were open to change, and they became much more individualistic, okay, than the generations, the groups of people that went through the Depression and then through the war. And they forgot about what the government could do when it was called upon to do big things. They took for granted all those roads and all the parks and all the public works that were accomplished by the New Deal. People just took that for granted as if it was always there. And they didn't realize that it was one continuous administration that did that, and that got us out of World War II, and that created the backlog of funds that was responsible for the boom after the Second World War. They just didn't make any of those connections. And when they grew up, and when they began to take over during the 1970s, they had different ideas, just as the government was going off the gold standard for good. They were still looking at public finance as if they were living in a gold standard time. Steve Gonzo says, hi and bye everyone. I've lost my sound today. I'm off to troubleshoot. I said, catch you later. Steve says, I bought a hummingbird feeder and hung it out my window. My quarantine entertainment. Sandy said, bye, Steve. Carmen said, I'm having trouble liking comments. Must be gremlins in my device again. Yeah, sometimes I have that. Sandy said, you might have to leave and come back to the chat. Barbara says, laugh out loud, what a shock. While thousands die, let's manipulate the vote. Your Democratic Party. Steve says, me too. It shoots me to a blank page. Sandy says, it makes no sense not to postpone. Steve says, Katie Halper, okay, is wonderful. Yeah, she's very, very funny and very bright. And she's a terrific fighter. Evidence that corona is airborne has been found outside patients' rooms and in nanoparticles encircling carriers / infected. Sandy Dex says, if I had to vote, I would wrap myself in plastic wrap, okay, and go. Okay, and hopefully by the time we have to vote, it'll be possible to have a mask by then and to wear gloves. Then we could probably go. Carmen says long-term financial aid has to become a reality and not just for corporations and industries. Yes, everybody should have an account at the Fed, so the Fed can easily mark up that account when it becomes necessary. Sandy says no one wants to vote for a candidate that has the dementia, okay, and is a rapist. Well, to be fair to Joe, he may have been one, but it's very doubtful that he's one now. Sandy says absolutely he's a sexual predator. Barbara says desperate times call for desperate measures. Sandy says I messaged mine. Sandy says I called. Is that letter writing group still active? Oh, you mean the certified letters group? Still online, still there, still can be used. Barbara said I called. Unfortunately, Elizabeth Warren is my senator. So frustrating. Well, call angry. Write angry. Be angry. Kay says, hell, no one is at home at Capitol Hill anyway. Well, not in the Senate. They're at home in the House. Well, I guess they're not quite at home. The House is still in session, though. Lana says, I'll match your Warren and raise you a Klobuchar. Sandy says, I have Booker and Menendez. And Lana says, I wish I could vote for Shahed. At least I get to vote, okay, for Omar. Steve says, I guess I still got Kamala, and I don't remember the other one. Is Feinstein still in there? Yeah. Yeah. Feinstein is still in there. Sandy says, primary their asses. Kay says, I'm no longer voting for the lesser of two evils. Clinton was the last one for me. Barbara says, I agree they need to have for masses. The people scare them. Just getting back, totally got kicked offline. Like Kathy Bates and fried green tomatoes. Sorry, couldn't resist. Never Trump, never Biden, only Bernie. Steve says, we need to get this People's Party going. We do. We do need to get the People's Party going. That's something we could also do online. I should have mentioned that. Barbara says, I'll write Bernie in this time. Biden is not better than Trump. Yeah, that's the way I feel. From our point of view, Biden is not better than Trump. And Teresa says, oh, our compatriots. Sandy says, hi, Teresa. Hi, Teresa. Says Kay, and Steve says, I don't think we can fix anything by working within the Democratic Party. It's completely corrupt. And Carmen says, hola, mommy. And Sandy says, hey, Teresa, do they still have the letter writing group? Kay says, I think you're right on that. Kay says, I had some hope for a legit independent party, but not so much anymore. Teresa says, support the strikes, boycott Amazon, boycott Whole Foods, boycott Instacart, but grocery shopping. Sandy says, if Bernie goes independent, I'll vote for him. Yeah, me too, but no such luck. Steve says, I joined the Green Party for a while, but they can't seem to win anything. Teresa says, there is more than voting. Me too, Sandy, but he signed an agreement that he wants in order to get into the primary. Yeah, but I think Bernie can claim that it hasn't been a fair primary because they rigged the voting machines, and that so he's not bound by the agreement he made. Barbara says, nope, we've won nothing. Sandy says, yes, but they cheated and broke the contract. That's what I think too, Sandy. Steve says, I went outside today. It was very depressing. Kay says, independent party, about the same, Steve, except for a few state and local offices. Barbara says we have to scare them with numbers. Sandy says primary their asses. Barbara says call, call, call. Steve says which song? Ding dong though. Bye bye Birdie, but change it to Nancy. Which song? Bye bye Birdie, but change it to Nancy. Yeah, bye bye Nancy. And Barbara Reed says Barbara. Barbara Warnick says they're servants of the people. Steve says the bitches. Dad Sandy says they are our public servants, not the other way around. We're screwed. How about Twisted Sister, says Lana. We're not going to take it, quote unquote. And Steve says 100,000 is more dead than World War II. Kay says, no need to yell at us, Joe. Laugh out loud. We already know. Sandy says he's passionate. Sandy says, I do the same thing, Joe. Barbara says, no yelling is what's needed. We need to act. Is anyone still here? And yeah, everyone's still here. Still here. And Sandy says, hi, Carmen. And Sandy says, hi, too. Laugh out loud. Kay says, I just hate the yelling. Kay says, we need more than just yelling anyway. It hasn't helped so far. Well, we haven't had enough of it yet. You have to yell, Kay. You have to call your congressman and yell. Sandy says, I work in a school. I am used to it. Sandy says, yes, they do work for us. And really, 400,000, Dad? I thought 750,000. My bad. Okay, look up the Wikipedia entry and see what it says today. Sandy says, I agree people are upset and hurting. Rick Maynard says, night all. Barbara says, thank you, Joe. I love a plan to fight back. Well, it's a plan of sorts. It's not a very precise plan, but maybe we don't need a precise plan. I mean, maybe what we need is a blunt instrument. That's what I'm saying here. You know, just a blunt instrument used many, 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 many times until they're finally convinced that when the election comes down, we're going to use the blunt instrument. Sandy says, I am angry too. Steve says, yes, are dead. Russia lost millions. I'll ask Siri, you're probably right. Yeah, Russia lost in the many millions. Germany lost also millions, but not as much as the Germans killed in Russia, of course. And the people in the middle, the Poles, the Jews, East Europeans, Hungarians, they all lost huge amounts in their population. The French lost less because they gave up early. The British, I think, had more killed than France did in World War II, because France had lost huge amounts of their population in the First World War. They really took it on the chin there, as did Germany, as did Russia. Kay says, I agree, Steve. Kay says, we have to wait weeks or months for any free community health center apartments here in Ohio. What the hell good is that? I'm sorry, health center appointments here in Ohio. Steve says, first Tulsi, now AOC, and Bernie can't throw a punch. I'm frustrated. And Kay says, we need a younger Bernie, I guess. SMH. Now, maybe Bernie will learn to throw a punch. It's getting very serious. Steve says, I actually love Jess Ventura the most, but he's not going to run. If only to speak truth to 9/11. Steve Wolfbrand said, one correction. I had hopes for AOC, but she seems to be backing off, okay, from what I have been hearing. Well, we have to wait a little while to see if she's really backing off or not, or just making some feints at this time. And Barbara says 1,200 is precious little outside of Boston. Yeah, and outside of Washington. I'm in a subsidized active senior building, and my rent just went up to $1,205. So the 1,200 would not cover that. Kay says, I've been afraid for years now. I'm damn sick of it for sure. Carmen says, keep getting kicked off now, no sound. Art. It's Facebook. It's not here, it's Facebook. Kay says, the Green New Deal would be the same now. Lana says, has everyone signed up for email from a movement for a People's Party? I have. But I had signed up, okay, a long time ago, so I get emails from Movements for a People's Party. Dolores says yes. Kay says, I have called Joe, but no one listens in Ohio. And Carmen says, reading on Bloomberg, there's a battle brewing for your $1,200 government check, a relief check. The Jiminy Cricket's more bad news. Haven't finished it. Can't concentrate for nothing. Carmen, I'm still feeling. I'll believe it when I see it in my bank account. Lana says, Ventura's a libertarian. No thanks. Steve says, thanks for reading all the comments. Well, thank you, Steve, and everyone else for making all the comments. I've now run out of comments. I was happy to get all the comments. I love comments. So thank you very much. And thank you very much for coming and for being here. I think it's time for me to call it a night. So I'm going to be ending the stream. Everybody have a good night. I'll be back on again tomorrow night in the 9 o'clock hour sometime. Thanks again. And please share, share, share. And please go to my Patreon account every once in a while. Bye.